how do we create a healthy person so that the cancer can't develop? That is a cancer-causing factory.
What are 5 of the top things that anyone can do starting today to significantly reduce their risk of getting cancer in the future?
Well, Drew, the 2 biggest drivers are diet and toxins. In fact, I was on a rotation in medical school for oncology, and I asked my professor back in the day, and this was in the 80s, I said, what percentage of cancers do you think are diet related? And I thought he'd say like 10%, 20%. I'm like, he said 70%. And I'm like, holy crap, that's a lot. So the thing that I really focus on around diet is the starch and sugar, because we know that insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes, that belly fat, that is a cancer causing factory. And the inflammation from there, the high levels of growth hormone, we call IGF-1, which is a growth hormone analog. These all will cause tremendous amounts of cancer. So we know pancreatic cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer, and others are linked to this phenomenon of insulin resistance, which comes from starch and sugar in the diet. So that's a huge one. The second is environmental toxins. We talked about briefly, but we're exposed to 80,000 new chemicals since the last century, and many of these have not been tested for safety. Many of them are banned that are used here. They're banned in Europe and other countries, like BHT and other things. And we need to look at reducing our load. And that's really, why I focus a lot on detoxification in my work, why I'm on the board of the Environmental Working Group. And they have a great website called ewg.org. And you can look at how do you buy household products that are non-toxic, skincare products that are non-toxic, how do you use the right vegetables that are least contaminated with pesticides? How about meat, fish? So it really gives you a really comprehensive view of how to reduce your overall toxic burden in your home. The next thing that's really important is exercise. We know that exercise actually reduces inflammation, reduces insulin resistance, helps prevent cancer. So exercise is really important. Half an hour walk, even after dinner, even just a 15, 20-minute walk after dinner can really reduce your overall risk of insulin resistance and all the things that drive cancer. Microbiome plays a huge role. The gut flora really determine a lot about your health and drive inflammation. And by the way, cancer is an inflammatory disease. So anything that causes inflammation can cause cancer. So getting your microbiome healthy, we have a whole approach toward repairing your gut. We're coming out with a new product soon called Gut Food, like a multivitamin for your gut. The last thing is your nutritional status. And in America, 90% of Americans are deficient in one or more nutrients at the minimum level to prevent deficiency disease, not the amount needed for optimal health. And there are certain nutrients that are critically important in cancer. One is a class of nutrients called the methylation nutrients. This is B6, B12, folic acid. We know that deficiencies in folate and others can lead to cancer. It's really important to get those B vitamins up. The next is vitamin D. Vitamin D is a significant regulator of immune function and health. So it's really important to get the cancer under control by making sure you have optimal nutrients, particularly on the B vitamins, vitamin D. And of course, there's many more, but those are the ones I think of first.
So Mark, to help set the context a little bit about what cancer really is and how it emerges in the body, can you discuss the seed and soil analogy of cancer?
Well, I think, most of traditional medicine focuses on the wrong end of the stick. They burn poison and cut. and that can be helpful in some cases. And yes, it's helped us create a lot of survivors of cancer, but it's a pretty rudimentary, crude way of approaching cancer, which is you use surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation, or cut, burn, or poison people. Hope they don't die from the treatment. It's basically how it works. Functional medicine has a very different view, which is how do we create a healthy person so that the cancer can't develop? The truth is that all of us have cancer right now in our bodies. Our cells can become dysregulated and mutated, but we have an immune system that's designed to help manage that and get rid of it. So many of us, if we have a healthy soil, we really can't get cancer to grow. So the key, how do you create a healthy soil? What is your nutritional status? What is your immune status? What's your microbiome? How is your toxic load? What's going on with your hormone balance? What's going on with insulin, blood sugar? So we really can look at a lot of these root cause factors and help people to optimize the health of their soil, their health, for sort of like regenerative agriculture, where you create a healthy soil and the consequences are healthy plants. Same thing with humans. And this is functional medicine. We create a healthy person and the disease has no place to reside. So functional medicine is really not about treating disease. It's about creating health. And when you look at the science of creating health, functional medicine is really the best model out there to do that. And it helps to really reduce the overall aspects of your risk. I remember one patient came in, Dhru. She had 3 cancers. She over time, she had colon cancer, breast cancer, some other cancer. And each time they're like, oh, we'll treat that cancer. And then we'll do active surveillance, which doesn't mean active anything. It just means every 3-6 months you get a CAT scan and hope for the best. So it's not really active anything. It's really just like tracking people to make sure it doesn't recur, as opposed to functional medicine, which is like, well, gee, why did this woman get 3 cancers? And what can we do to look at the root cause of that? And what is her soil like? And how do we optimize the soil so the cancer can't grow back? That's really what we do in functional medicine. And it's such a powerful model, treating the terrain and not just the underlying, cancer itself.
If you go on WebMD and you look up cancer and sugar, there are a couple prominent articles that basically say that your consumption of sugar, which also includes refined carbohydrates, has nothing to do with how cancer develops in the body. But then you have leading experts that have been on your podcast, individuals like Dr. William Li, who's the founder of the Angiogenesis Foundation and literally researches this for a living, who are sounding the alarm that actually, no, cancer can be fueled by having excess sugar in your diet. Help us understand why a trusted source like WebMD, could be saying and educating people that maybe cancer and sugar don't have a link, and then other people would be saying that there is a link.
Well, often people say the more confused we are, the more opinions there are. I think it's complicated. For me, the data is not unclear, and I think the insulin resistance and cancer story is so important. And I think if you look, for example, on PubMed, looking at cancer and insulin resistance, there's 14,309 articles as of January 14th, confirming that there is a link between insulin resistance and the risk of cancer. There's no doubt about it in my mind. So I think the people who are unfortunately saying that it's not an issue are probably not up to date on the science. It's hard to ignore. It's not a couple of articles here or there. There's mechanistic articles. There's population health studies. There's no equivocation about the role of cancer and insulin resistance. And so sugar and carbohydrates, starchy carbohydrates, cause insulin resistance. So if you just don't believe me, go to PubMed, just Google PubMed, type in insulin resistance and cancer, and you'll find the 14,000 articles, and you can start reading the abstracts and summaries. Don't take my word for it, So I think it's important that people realize that there's a lot of forces at play in the medical industrial complex and the big food, and it's disturbing. I think I don't know what else to say about it other than yes, it's a thing.
You talked a little bit about active screening, which you have shared that is, not really very active at all, but that's often the best that advice that conventional medicine is giving. But as you mentioned, there's plenty of things that you can do from a functional medicine standpoint. That's what today's podcast is about. What are your thoughts on a few of the emerging areas that are starting to get more attention, like liquid biopsies and the usage of things like immunotherapy when it comes to treating cancers?
We're in a real revolution now around cancer therapy and treatment, which is very exciting because we're moving past the cut, burn, and poison phase of cancer to understand that we can use the body's own immune system and that we can even have early diagnosis. So there is a new test called the GRAIL test, which is a test that is a liquid biopsy that measures proteins from 50 different cancers and can detect things very early. The challenge with that is you might get some things that are just, maybe not that significant or that would not progress to cancer, and then you have to chase it down, follow it, and it's called a red herring. So you might need a total body MRI, you might need a PET scan. There's a lot of potential costs and fear that can be associated with getting a positive result. However, I'm going to do it because I want to know early if there's anything cooking, and then I can address it. And the thing about cancer is the earlier you address it, the better chance you have of survival. So I think that's really important, and that we should be looking at those things. And there are other companies that are doing this as well. Freenome, which is looking at colon cancer, and Grail testing. So there's a lot of companies that are really moving forward in this space. The next thing I would say is that in terms of the immunotherapy treatments and other treatments, there's a whole class of advances around how do we activate the body's own immune system for cancer. And checkpoint inhibitors are these new class of drugs that are basically called immunotherapy that have to that can have dramatic results. Like in stage 4 cancers, they can literally cure people where other things wouldn't work. There's also new personalized vaccines that type the cancer, look at the mutations, look at the proteins produced, and then create personalized vaccines against those particular proteins. So your body's own antibodies will kill that. That's a really cool thing. So it's really less side effects and it's more directed therapy. So we're seeing more and more options around how do we think differently about the treatment of cancers. And I also think there's some other things that could be helpful too that are being used in other countries, very different from conventional approaches.
So you started to answer this, and I'd love you to expand on it further. If today you were diagnosed with cancer, what steps and things would you do to begin the process of addressing it? And how would you assemble a team around you to help you get to the root of treating that cancer?
That's a great question. I mean, I feel like, I try to design my days and my life to actually help prevent all chronic disease, whether it's heart disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, cancer. And it's not like you have to do different things for everything. It's like similar therapies will actually help all of these. So I double down on diet every day. I really make sure I have high quality nutrient dense food full of phytochemicals that are anti-cancer, full of good omega-3 fats, low in starch and sugar, and it actually has a lot of nutrients and things that can help my body actually handle a cancer. So diet is huge. Exercise, I do that regularly to help get enough sleep. Stress reduction, also very important, because your thoughts and feelings do affect your cancer risk too. That's for sure. And then I make sure my nutrient status is optimized with vitamin D and the B vitamins by taking the right supplements. This is sort of my daily maintenance approach. And then I do other things that I think can be very helpful. I like to do ozone quite a bit because I find it very helpful for me, and I think it can be an early treatment for just kind of boosting your immune system, helping increase your antioxidant enzymes, reducing inflammation, increases stem cells. So it just helps the body to build a stronger terrain and be able to fight whatever is going on. And who knows? There needs to be more research on it. I think there's some controversy about it. But I think there's some really interesting options there. There's different people using hyperthermia for cancer, raising the body temperature and getting treatment that way. There are other therapies, that are more aggressive dietary approaches. But I think it would be, building a comprehensive team that focuses on lifestyle and that also tries some other modalities that could be helpful, and to look at the ways in which, whatever cancer, let's say I would have, what it responds to best or least. So there's some personalization involved. But I think there's a lot of options now around cancer and cancer therapy that are pretty exciting. High dose IV vitamin C. There's people looking at compounds that are derived from marijuana plants. There are people looking at various kinds of immunotherapy and vaccines, as well as things like ozone, hyperthermia, and other things. So there's a lot of research that needs to get done for some of these things, but it's really promising in my mind that we'll be able to sort of lick this.
So, Mark, is there a case study that comes to mind of someone who you were part of their cancer team? You don't work with a lot of cancer patients directly, but you might work with a team who would be helping them from a functional medicine standpoint. Is there a case study that comes to mind on the topic of cancer?
Yeah, I mean, years ago, I had a patient with prostate cancer, and it was fairly aggressive, and he needed a bunch of therapies, but we were able to really keep it under control through aggressive dietary approach, a bunch of different supplements that helped. Fixing his gut, getting rid of heavy metals. So we kind of cleaned up his whole terrain, and he did remarkably well and lasted well over 20 years, which is a long time with cancer. So I felt like, he probably would have been dead a long time ago if we hadn't have used this functional medicine approach and created an integrated model where he not only received regular care, but he received sort of the adjunctive care that helps support the body in its own healing and repair process.
Well, I'll have an anecdote that I'd like to toss in, which is my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, and this was about 8 years ago. And after her diagnosis, we put her team together. She had a traditional oncologist through her normal insurance and hospital system. She was at a great hospital, Christiana Care in Delaware. And
Yeah.
as part of that, we understood the importance of making sure we had a functional medicine doctor in the mix. So we had a cancer survivor herself, Dr. Liz
Yeah.
Boehm, who was one of your colleagues and the medical director of the Ultra Wellness Center, was her main doctor. And so with her oncologist and Dr. Boehm, who's a nutritionist, a medical doctor, and a cancer survivor. And then there was one other person. Sometimes individuals will use sort of like a cancer CEO. There's a gentleman named Ralph Moss. He's a PhD cancer researcher who was previously at Sloan Kettering, and he has a website called cancerdecisions.com or .org. We'll link it in the show notes. And he walks through every major cancer and talks about all the centers around the world that have had good results in treating that cancer. Some places like you've visited in the past as well, like Sanoviv in Mexico and some clinics out of Germany. Mm-hmm. So he met with my mom as well. And he does consultations. They're a little pricey, around like $700, $800, but well worth it. And with the combination of those three individuals, my mom's traditional oncologist, Dr. Liz Boehm, Dr. Ralph Moss, they worked together to put together a protocol for my mom, which included putting her on a ketogenic diet, getting her off of all the foods that were consistently spiking her blood sugar and making her insulin resistant, which were all the Indian vegetarian foods, unfortunately, that she had been grown up eating her entire life.
Yeah.
Doing a complete oil change, getting her off of all the inflammatory oils, getting her to have high quality proteins and things like omega-3s in her diet and a bunch of other changes. And knock on wood, we were able to catch it early. And 8-10 years later, she's doing fantastic. And about 2 years into her treatment, she was officially diagnosed in remission. Obviously, every cancer is different. Every patient is different. But that's another anecdote that I just wanted to add into the mix about what it looks like when you have a team approach to tackle something like cancer.
It's so important. I think you mentioned something I forgot to talk about earlier, which is in terms of dietary interventions. There's a lot of research now going into ketogenic diet research and cancer. And in animal models, it's, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, stage 4 melanoma are literally being cured with ketogenic diets. And Siddhartha Mukherjee, who wrote The Emperor of All Maladies, who's one of the top cancer experts in the world, and won the Pulitzer Prize for that book on cancer, is doing a lot of clinical research now with humans and ketogenic diets. Also, groups like Walter Longo and his work around fasting mimicking diets or calorie restriction, which also can put people in a more of a ketogenic state, was very effective in helping chemotherapy be more effective, radiation be more effective. So it's not an either or, but it can be an adjunctive treatment. My friend Patrick Hanaway, who is the medical director with me at Cleveland Clinic, ended up getting throat cancer, and he ended up, being on a ketogenic diet and almost had no side effects from treatment, is doing great a few years later. And he, his risk was, 50-50 on that cancer. So really impressive to see the work that's being used around ketogenic diets and cancer.
Fantastic. Well, Mark, let's go into some community questions that have been sent in from listeners of the podcast. The first question that we have here is, what do you think is the progression of someone setting themselves up for cancer to grow in the body? For instance, do you think there are clues in the body that show up well before a cancer diagnosis is present that are an indication of what's to come?
Yeah, like I said earlier, we all have cancer growing in us. And so the question is, what are the things that you can look at that are potentially looking at your risk? And I think I always look at insulin resistance, looking at glucose tolerance tests with insulin, hemoglobin A1C, look at lipids, because that tells you a lot about the blood sugar regulation, particle size, particle number. Look at CRP, which is another marker of inflammation. And there's many others. I like the liquid biopsy idea for sure. I think that we look at family history, we look at their lifestyle, we look at all their habits, exposures, and we just try to reduce all of that to create the best conditions for health. So, I think for me, all of us should be living a cancer preventive lifestyle, Alzheimer's preventive lifestyle, a heart disease preventive lifestyle. And it's all the same. We look at aging and all the age-related diseases, the biggest risk factor is getting older. And when you get older, it's actually because there's a lot of breakdown in the normal systems in the body that are more likely to break down if you don't put the energy into reverse or mitigate those changes. It's really important to actually make sure you create a healthy environment in the body so that you're not prone to cancer. And we know how to do all the things we just talked about: diet, exercise, supplements, lowering toxic load, nutritional status. All those things are so important. So I feel like, it's an exciting moment in cancer therapy because we're beginning to understand, really what are the conditions that drive cancer and how we reduce those. But I don't, I think, there are early detection tests like the Grail test, which can be help, or Freenome. But those are detecting cancer after you already had it. There's total body MRIs that people are getting. I've had one from head to toe. That's also something you can use for screening. All those are very expensive interventions. So I think, as science advances, as we start to understand more about cheaper imaging and about this Grail testing, the prices will come down and people will be able to actually look and screen for stuff and then get in on the game of fixing it much earlier.
Are there any experts or people who really focus in on cancer that you would recommend to their audience to look up or check out their books or to start following for more information on this topic?
Yeah, I think there's a few people who are talking about some of these issues. Jason Fung wrote Cancer Code. William Li wrote Eat to Beat Disease. Walter Longo's written a book called Longevity Diet. All these are interesting frameworks of how to look at a different approach to preventing and treating cancer. And I think there's William Servan Schreiber also wrote a book about cancer. I forget what it's called, All About Cancer or something. I forget the name of it, but we'll get in the show notes. And it's really focusing on how do we change our lifestyle environment so we reduce the risks and help improve outcomes even if we get cancer.
Do you want to know my secrets for living a long and happy and healthy life? Well, all you have to do is check out my weekly newsletter, Mark's Picks, where I share my favorite tips for health, longevity, well-being, and lots more. Check it out and link below.
All right, next question. This is a question about autoimmune medications. How do typical autoimmune medications play or not play a role in cancer? And should there be any cause for concern for medications in general increasing your risk or likelihood of developing cancer in the future?
One of the class of medications that's being used increasingly to treat the ever-growing burden of autoimmune disease, which now affects 80 million people, are these drugs called immunosuppressives or biologics, like TNF alpha drugs, Humira, et cetera, Enbrel, and many others that are now on the market. What they do is they stop a molecule called TNF alpha, which is a really important immune molecule, which helps stop the inflammation in these autoimmune diseases. But at the same time, it lowers your own immunity. So you're more likely to get infections. You're more likely to get cancer. So there is a risk of these drugs in terms of long-term risk of cancer and infection. So I much more prefer treating autoimmune disease using functional medicine, getting to the root cause and getting people healthy without using all that heavy-duty drugs. But they do increase the risk of cancer, and we should be aware of that.
What about foods that actually help us fight or potentially even reduce our risk of cancer? Are there foods or food categories that are helpful? We talked a lot about what's harmful. What about what's helpful?
So I think that's really important. So, you cut all the crap, what are you going to eat instead? It's really whole foods, anti-inflammatory foods, low glycemic foods, phytochemically rich foods, fiber-rich foods. So we're talking about fruits and vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole beans, whole grains in limited quantities, because that can be starchy for some people with metabolic issues, which is about 9 to 10 Americans. And also all the phytochemicals in food. So colorful, rainbow-colored vegetables and fruits, super important. And then there's special foods like garlic and ginger and spices that are awesome to use, curcumin. So including a lot of spices is really important. And so getting the fats right in your body is key. You talked about your mother getting an oil change, getting on more omega-3 fats, olive oil, fish oil, getting off the refined oils, super important. So I think there are so many beneficial foods out there that can help reduce the risk of cancer simply by actually getting your phytochemical richness of your diet increased. And that's just eating lots of colorful fruits and vegetables.
What supplements can play a helpful role when it comes to the topic of cancer? And I mean more in the category of helping us potentially reduce the risk factors or improve certain aspects of our biomarkers of health that downstream could impact cancer?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important ones are B complex and a vitamin D, and then maybe some fish oil. Although there's been mixed data on that, but I do think it's so important that people get their levels up. So a good multivitamin, fish oil, and vitamin D will take care of 90% of it for most people, and I think that's just should be a basic staple for everybody. You can add probiotics in there because the microbiome plays a big role in cancer. So making sure you have adequate probiotics in your diet, either prebiotic or probiotic foods or probiotic supplements, super important. But those are the things that I really focus on when it comes to reducing the risk of cancer and helping to create a long-term viable immune system.
Can intermittent fasting or some version of regular fasting be helpful in reducing our risk of cancer?
Absolutely. So giving the body a chance to repair and heal every day is so important. So we talk about time-restricted eating, which is a 12, 14-hour, 16-hour fast. It sounds like a lot, but if you eat dinner at 6, you eat breakfast at 6, that's a 12-hour fast. If you eat breakfast at 8, that's a 14-hour fast. So it's not that hard. And what it does is it allows your body to go through this process of autophagy, mitophagy, waste disposal, cleaning up, recycling of old parts. It increases stem cell production, reduces inflammation, increases antioxidant enzymes, helps your brain chemistry, bone density, and muscle mass, reduces insulin resistance, increases muscle, and lowers body fat in the belly. I mean, there's just so many benefits to it. So I think it's an important adjunctive treatment for a daily repair and maintenance. I mean, imagine like, living in a house and taking the garbage out every day, but eventually your garage fills up with garbage and it never gets picked up and your house starts to stink and it's like a mess. That's exactly what happens to us if we just keep eating all the time. You got to stop, take a break, let your body do the repair and healing, and then you'll create more longevity, reduce the risk of inflammation, cancer, and many, many other things.
Hey YouTube, if you like this video, you're gonna love the next one.
You have a unique experience that has informed your way of thinking about cancer.
Yeah.
Because when you're 30 and you're now, can I say 50?
51, yeah. You can say it.
You had cancer. And when I first met you, you had really short hair because you just had chemo and all the treatments that cause you to lose your hair. And you actually figured out how to make sure that you weren't going to get cancer again. And a lot of people, knock, knock. Well, it's been 21 years. I think you're good. But, it's interesting. I remember these patients coming to the practice, and one of them had breast cancer, and she had colon cancer, and she had 3 cancers. And the doctor's like, well, we're just going to do screening. We're just going to see what happens. Good luck. You had your chemo radiation surgery, and now there's nothing you can do except wait, and we'll, do a active surveillance.
Right.
It's not active nothing. It's active nothing. You do nothing, and there's no plan of what to eat or how to figure out why you got the cancer or what to do about it. So whether you're wanting to prevent it or you've had it and you want to get it again, it's important to do a holistic look at your biology.
It really is because, all of us are individuals, and for me, my undergraduate and graduate degree was in nutrition, and I was an exercise physiologist, and I love to eat right and exercise right. So I was doing those things, but there were aspects that I needed to really focus on in terms of me being able to prevent a recurrence of cancer or another type of cancer. So yeah, I was 30. I had a triple negative breast cancer. I don't have any family history of breast cancer. It was aggressive. I was very lucky that I found it early as I did, but I did go through surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, and
all the fun stuff.
Oh yeah. And
poisoning, burning, and slashing.
Yeah, and then came out on the other side, and I was like, okay, I've got to really figure out why did this happen to me, and what can I do to prevent this from happening again, or how can I help my patients?
Yeah.
And when I first went to AFMCP, it was after I started working at Canyon Ranch in Lenox, and where I met you, and
functional medicine training program.
Exactly. And it was just like this light bulb went off in my head where I was like, okay, this makes so much sense. I want to think about this in a totally different way. We've got to look at how all the different systems in the body impact if you're going to develop cancer or not. We've got to pay attention to the terrain in the body, the soil, the things that are feeding the cancer cell. And so each person, it's different. For me, I had to really focus on supporting my microbiome and detoxification and stress. But for somebody else, it might be really working on reversing insulin resistance,
diet,
right? Or diet. And so it's really important to have a real personalized approach here. And
agree.
It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it does. And I think what I want people to understand is that, we strongly support the use of traditional cancer treatments, whether it's chemo, radiation, or surgery, but it's not enough because it's treating the cancer, not the patient and the soil in which the cancer grew.
Right.
And so functional medicine is an approach that really treats the soil so the cancer can't grow back or that you won't get it in the first place. And I think that's a really unique approach. It's not either or. Right. It's not like, just have green juice and your cancer is going to go away.
Yep.
Forget that. You need to deal with it. But using supportive treatments, it works better. We have a colleague and a friend who recently had throat cancer, and it's 50-50 on that. But he did a ketogenic diet when he was going through treatment. Now, there's a lot of science on this, and one of the top cancer specialist, Siddhartha Mukherjee, who wrote The Emperor of All Maladies, is doing a lot of research on ketogenic diets and cancer. Yep. And he came up to me once and he said, "Mark, we've made an amazing discovery about cancer." I'm like, "What is that?" I said, "Is it sugar?" He's like, "How did you know?" I'm like, "Yeah, well, it feeds the cancer." And he said, "We're finding that, using chemotherapy along with ketogenic diets or even the fasting mimicking diets, different approaches, intermittent fasting, can actually help the chemo radiation work better and have higher cure rates." And so
because it puts those cancer cells, they're stressed in those situations, so they can't survive as well. And so the chemotherapy kills those cancer cells in those when somebody's on a ketogenic diet or a fasting mimicking diet. Those cancer cells are more at risk, and so they die off
because they only eat sugar. They can't live on fat.
Right.
So we have like we're hybrid.
Yes.
So we can we can run on gas or electric, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, same thing with your body. You can run on carbs or on fat.
Yep.
And when you run on just fat, it changes your metabolism, and the cancer cells only run on sugar.
Yep.
So they starve. So this is just one example of the kinds of things we do in functional medicine to help our patients do better through treatment and actually prevent it after, and to actually not get it in the first place. So people feel sort of helpless about this, but there's so much we know about what causes cancer, the things we can measure and test for, the things that you sort of discovered on your own. And I think it's sort of shocking for people to understand that traditional medicine just doesn't even talk about this. Right.
They're so focused on the cancer at the acute time, which is important. But we've also got to really work on let's prevent it from coming back. Let's prevent it from coming in the first place.
And the dietary advice is terrible you get in cancer centers. I have a friend who was a top radiation oncologist at MD Anderson, which is like the top cancer center in the world. And he was like, "Our nutritionist, I'm just struggling because they say if you have breast cancer, don't eat tofu, but you can load up on ice cream."
Right, which
and
is
I'm like,
so
what?
backwards.
Eat the tofu, forget the ice cream.
Right.
They don't say stop drinking wine or don't eat ice cream or sugar, which is driving the cancer cells.
Right. Creating a terrain in the body, which is feeding cancer.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So absolutely, we're looking for all those things that may create a terrain that will feed cancer, whether it's high insulin, high blood sugar, high insulin levels in the body, high inflammatory markers, so high inflammation in the body, which will drive cancer.
Yeah, cancer's inflammatory. People don't realize that.
Absolutely. Right. So we look for that. We test for markers that measure inflammation, and then try to figure out why is there inflammation and what can we do to lower it. For some people, it might be, the insulin resistance that's driving the inflammation. For somebody else, it may be the gut and, imbalances in the microbiome that's driving the inflammation. So we really want to look deeper.
Or toxins.
Absolutely.
Right? So when you go to a traditional oncologist, they're just looking at the pathology. They're not looking at the biology, right?
Yep.
And they don't actually look at the terrain, which is your nutritional status, your stress level, your
sleep,
level of toxins,
right?
your
your
sleep,
toxins,
your microbiome, your genetics around. I mean, they look at some genetics, but it's not the kinds of things we look at, which are more functional things, and not the BRCA gene, which is
right.
But it's interesting. The BRCA gene, back in the 40s, they sort of had records around this, and then, the risk of cancer was like 30% if you had the BRCA gene. Now it's like 70%.
Right.
Why is that? Same gene, because the environment's different.
Yep.
Our diet's different. Toxic load is more.
Yep.
Stress is more. All these other variables are affecting the gene expression.
Right.
So even if you have the genes, you're not necessarily
predestined to get something.
Right. So we call the BRCA gene like a high impact gene, right? It increases risk substantially of breast cancer, but so many women don't have the BRCA gene and still go on to get breast cancer.
Yeah.
So we also look at these low impact genes that we can really influence with the environment, genes that aren't going to cause a huge increase in risk of cancer. But if you've got multiple different ones together, they can influence your risk. And what's most important with those low impact genes is we can really influence how they express themselves with our environment. So we can influence, the expression of some of our genes by eating a diet that's really rich in our cruciferous vegetables and sulforaphane.
The broccoli family.
Yeah, the broccoli family. So, and we can maybe influence how these genes work by different supplements or different changes in diet. So like I had a woman who came to see me. She was 42. And she had an estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. And she went through surgery, and then they did tamoxifen. And she came to see me because she wanted to prevent this from coming back, right? So she's like, I really want to figure out why this happened and want to prevent it from coming back. And so we did multiple different, evaluations on her. And one of the things that showed up was when we did some genetic testing, again, those low impact genes, we found a variation in the COMT gene. And the COMT is a gene that encodes for this enzyme, catechol-methyltransferase, which is
mouthful, but
that.
It has to do with what?
Yeah, it has to do with methylation, right? But it's been found that methylation just means the transfer of these methyl groups, which come from a lot of our folate, our B vitamins, like folate, which is in all of our foliage, our green leafy veggies,
Basically a carbon and 3 hydrogens that has to be shared between different chemicals in the body, and if it's not working, you get all kinds of problems, whether you get cancer, you get dementia, you get heart disease, you get depression. So these have to be working.
Yes. And so if this enzyme doesn't work as well because of your genetic predisposition, then your estrogen in your body doesn't get broken down and gotten rid of as well. It can become more cancer producing. It can change in a way that's less healthy for the body. And so we know that we can influence that gene when we give a diet that's rich in folate, all those green leafy veggies. We can sometimes influence that gene we often give like methylated B vitamins. I think this
special forms of B vitamins. You don't go to the grocery store, you get, folic acid or B12. It may not be the right form to actually activate these things or to bypass these enzymes that aren't working so well in the body.
Yeah, I mean, we have a concern about folic acid, which is the synthetic form of folate. So folate can be what we get in our food, right? Our foliage, our green leafy veggies, lots of other foods too. There's a synthetic form called folic acid, which actually has been associated with maybe an increased risk of cancer. There's some concern about this synthetic form. And that's found in a lot of not the highest quality, not the vitamins we use, right? So it's found in some B vitamins and multivitamins that we're not going to choose to use because for some people, they can't utilize it in their body. What you really want to look for is a methylated form of folate. So this type of folate that's activated, that's found in a lot of our food. Like when we're eating folate-rich foods, it's going to be high in this methylfolate.
Yeah.
But if you're taking your supplements, if you're taking a multi or a B complex, you want to look to make sure it's a methylated form of folate. Because the body, for certain people, that's more necessary than others, but the body it has an easier time utilizing it. And that helps with this whole estrogen metabolism process.
And just to back up on that, so people think there's something called estrogen. There isn't. There are estrogens.
Yes, that's true.
And they're all a little different. And some are more prevalent in, early life, some in reproductive years, some in menopause. And they all have to be metabolized by the body.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like going down a pinball machine. You don't know where it's going to go. And some people don't have good detoxifying mechanisms for all this estrogen, and then they get sort of estrogen toxicity.
Right.
And I think, one of the things that's really striking about what you're saying, particularly in terms of breast cancer, is that, this woman had estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. And what that means is that this is an estrogen sensitive breast cancer. It feeds on estrogen.
Right.
And so
the beautiful thing about functional medicine is that we can, one, test for all these metabolites and figure out how to change the pinball thing so it's going down the right pathway to be anti-cancer versus pro-cancer. And we use lifestyle, diet, supplements, all kinds of things to do that. But what's really important to understand is that a lot of us are out of balance, and we have imbalances in our hormones, and we make too much estrogen,
Right.
and maybe not enough progesterone, and that leads to symptoms of estrogen overload.
Yes.
And I remember, medical school wasn't a very nice way to talk about patients, but we remembered, how do we remember the profile of someone with uterine cancer?
Yes.
Fat, 40, and fertile, right?
Yep. Right. Which is essentially saying high estrogen.
And if you're overweight, you make higher estrogen.
Right.
Obesity is linked to cancer. It's linked to breast cancer. Insulin resistance and prediabetes is linked to breast cancer and many other cancers.
We have this enzyme aromatase in our fat cells, and aromatase takes other hormones and turns it into estrogen.
Yeah.
And this happens in men and women,
Yeah.
right? So when you have more fat cells, you have more aromatase, and so you have more estrogen. And so that then is why, or maybe one of the reasons why, that obesity, having more fat cells, is linked to estrogen-related cancers, which would be breast, uterine, prostate, is definitely related to this higher estrogen level in the body, for example. So one of the things everybody can do is make sure their body fat percentage is lower.
Yeah.
Right? Because that helps with lowering estrogen levels.
And we actually have a whole strategy for one assessing this in functional medicine, which is not what your traditional doctor will do if you go to breast cancer treatment. And we have a whole strategy for how to balance out your hormones, right?
Yes.
So things like diet, exercise, stress reduction, working on your microbiome, the right nutrients, getting rid of toxins that screw up your hormones, all these things, fixing your liver.
Right.
These can all really help. Fiber.
Yeah, we really want to pay attention to those xenoestrogens, right? Those are those toxins from the environment that act like estrogen in the body.
Yeah.
So those are environmental toxins, things we know about, like BPA, plastics, parabens, pesticides.
They put your sunblock on, you get all these parabens, maybe you're causing cancer.
Right. And because they can bind to, they're xenoestrogens. They're chemicals from the environment, but they can bind to the estrogen receptor in the body.
Yeah. So they're like hormone mimickers.
Yeah.
And they're effective and powerful at extremely low doses. So I'm not that exposed to pesticides, or I'm not getting that much parabens or whatever. They work in a microscopic dose to have a macroscopic effect.
Yep.
And they're synergistic. So people say, oh, this one chemical, maybe it's not so bad in animal studies. But we're exposed to hundreds, and maybe thousands of these chemicals all at the same time. And our different abilities to detoxify them affect our risk. And particularly in cancer, we know that these chemicals are associated with cancer. So how when someone comes in with, let's say, breast cancer, what are the kinds of tests we'll do? What are the recommendations you'd make? I mean, you have a whole incredible DVD I encourage everybody to get. Tell us about the DVD.
So it's called Breast Wellness, and it's tools to prevent and heal from breast cancer, and it looks at the functional medicine approach to breast health.
And where can they get that?
They can get it at my website, drboham.com. They can also download a free ebook there. I think it's also on Amazon and Vimeo. It's everywhere, right?
There you go.
Actually, it's on our ultrawellnesscenter.com too. Yeah.
So what we do?
But so you're looking at that comprehensive approach and treating that individual patient, right? And we're focusing on, is there toxins that we need to lower? You were mentioning that aspect of toxic load, which I think is really important, because we know that sometimes it's not just one toxin, but it's a little bit of a lot of different toxins. So we can look at things, we can measure things like, is there high oxidative stress? Right?
That's like free radicals, right?
Yeah, right. Which would indicate an imbalance between the antioxidant levels in the body and the free radical production, right? So sometimes when somebody has oxidative stress, that just means that they've either produced too much free radicals because of toxins or infections, or they don't have enough antioxidants, right? Because they're not eating enough of the phytonutrients that are the plant foods that are rich in antioxidants. And when we see that oxidative stress, which we can measure, we really work to lower it with a phytonutrient-rich diet. Sometimes we then have to look to see, well, why is it high in the first place? Yeah. Right? That's asking that question: is there some infection? Is there some toxin? Because you've got to figure out why, so that you can help with
insulin resistance, prediabetes.
Insulin resistance. Yep. Weight, that belly fat,
gut issues. You talk about how you measure the poop of
Yeah.
patients with breast cancer. Why is that relevant?
Right, because there's, I know, right? You're like, how is the poop connected to? Well,
There's
fact,
a microbiome in the breast.
Yes, right, and they're finding that the microbiome in the breast is different in women who have breast cancer. So there's so much more we're going to learn here. But in the gut, we know that if there's an imbalance in the microbiome, there can be an imbalance in this enzyme called beta glucuronidase. It can increase, which can then lead the body to absorb back more of the estrogen and then put you in this situation where you're more estrogen dominant or overloaded.
So basically there's like overgrowth of these bugs that shouldn't be there.
Yep.
That produce this enzyme.
Yep.
That then when the estrogen is detoxified by the liver and dumped in there in the bile, which is how your body gets rid of excess estrogen, it sort of unpacks it a little bit.
Yep.
And then you end up reabsorbing it. And so you get this
Yep.
increased reabsorption of estrogen, high levels of estrogen in breast cancer.
So we're looking at that level. We can measure that, and we can measure just the imbalances in the microbiome, which are impacting that level as well as multiple other things in the body.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, given the view of functional medicine, which looks at root causes and systems, the fact that antibiotics cause breast cancer is not a surprise.
no.
Right?
And I had, as a kid, I was on multiple rounds of antibiotics for urinary tract infections again and again and again.
Wow.
And then that just was probably the thing that, along with some of my genetic predispositions and some toxins, really allowed my body to not work in an optimal way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so powerful. So we actually, through things like lowering sugar and starch in the diet, through things like adding certain fibers to help the gut flora, things like certain anti-cancer foods like flax seeds.
Yep.
We can actually, and broccoli, family vegetables you were talking about, we can really have an impact on exercise and stress reduction. We put together a whole plan for people.
Yes.
It doesn't leave them feeling so hopeless and helpless and like, I just have to wait around to my next scan or my next mammogram and cross my fingers and stress out for the next 6 months or a year.
Right.
You can actually be empowered to understand what your biology is doing, what the imbalances are, how to fix them. And is there a guarantee you're never going to get cancer? No. But you're stacking the deck in your favor.
Yep.
And you're understanding the imbalances that are driving cancer, and you're changing the soil.
Changing the soil.
And that actually won't allow the cancer to grow.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a really powerful model that should be part of traditional oncology. And there are some centers of oncology that are integrating this.
Yeah.
But it's unusual.
Yeah.
So let's take the next, a little bit and talk about the next case of a patient who hasn't had cancer but was terrified because there was tons of cancer in their family.
Right. So this was a 48-year-old gentleman, and he had not had cancer yet, but he had a sister with breast cancer. There was stomach cancer in his family. There was colon cancer in his family, and prostate cancer. And so, he wanted to do whatever he could. He wanted to create that terrain where cancer was less likely to grow. And we also did genetic testing with him. Again, not the big genes, but some of those low impact genes. And we found a variation in one of his genes called the GSTM1, or glutathione transferase gene.
Yeah, I got that problem.
Yeah, and me too. I'm in that club
well,
too.
It's interesting, people who have this specific gene actually are much more likely to be in hospitals and sick and have issues, right?
Yeah.
And just to back up, before you get too much more into it, I just want to sort of help people understand, what genes are. So you have like 20,000 genes, and it's basically this genetic code that is a 3-letter code of is a gene. So you have, let's say, 4 letters. Computers are 1 to 0. Your biology is 4, like it's 4 ACTG. So if there's a variation in that code, it may not be a mutation. It's just a slight variation.
Yep.
It's sort of like in America we spell color COLOR. In the UK they spell CLOUR.
Yep.
So similar, but it has different effects. And that is something we can do something about, right? If you have the gene for Down syndrome, you can't do much about that, right? If you have a gene like for the glutathione, you can influence its function, hence functional medicine, and change the way those genes are expressed through things like diet and exercise and lifestyle and supplements and detoxification, all kinds of strategies that we use. And so we check genes that typically aren't checked.
Yep.
And we see, where does this person have the potholes, and how do we help them avoid them?
Yeah. So this, glutathione is this master antioxidant and detoxifier in the body. And we know, like you mentioned, when people are have a defect in this gene, in the GSTM1, they don't tolerate toxins as well from the environment because their body is not as able to take their, to make as much glutathione and then use the glutathione to get rid of the toxins.
Yeah, so the glutathione is like sulfur, smelly, sticky.
Yep.
It's like fly paper.
Yep.
And all the nasty toxins stick to it, and then your body gets rid of it.
Yes.
But if you have low levels, you're screwed.
Right.
Like me. That's why I got
one
mercury poisoning.
of the reasons you can have low levels is because you have some variations in these genes. And so for people like that, we really want to support. I mean, we want to support detoxification with everybody.
Right.
But with those people, we really focus on supporting how well they can produce glutathione. And so we will really focus on things like sulforaphane. Sulforaphane comes from your cruciferous vegetables, and it
Broccoli,
helps
collards, kale, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. This is like basic stuff in food that actually has powerful anti-cancer compounds. And sulforaphane is one of those. They've studied at Johns Hopkins. They have supplements you can take.
Yep.
We have that on our online store. It's really effective.
Yeah, that's actually one supplement I take every day. I mean, there's a bunch I take every day, but that's one I always take because it helps the body with production of that glutathione, and that really, as we said, helps with pulling those toxins out of the body.
And there's other stuff that you can take, like aside from things like garlic and onions and the cruciferous vegetables, there's a lot of supplements we use in functional medicine that, they're not replacements for a healthy diet, but they help to produce different molecules in the body and help different functions.
Yeah.
So N-acetylcysteine is one of the building blocks of glutathione and helps increase it. In fact, when I was in the ER as a doctor, because I worked in the ER for years, I learned that if someone came in with a liver failure from Tylenol overdose, we gave him this, quote, drug, which was called Nucremist or N-acetylcysteine, which smelled terrible, tasted terrible. We made him drink it.
Yep.
I guess the suicide attempt wasn't enough. and so they when I started doing functional medicine, I'm like, wait a minute, this is incredible. This is just a supplement that you can get in the health food store.
Yep.
And they even are studying it for kidney failure that's caused by dye when you get an X-ray.
Right.
And they actually can prevent kidney failure by giving them this, cheap supplement.
NAC, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really important.
I think that's really important about supplements. I think that what's really, they can be so beneficial when they're targeted and used for that individual person and what their needs are. And I think that's really sort of a take home here with supplements is that we can't, well, some people take the kitchen sink. They take a lot of different things and just hoping that one of them is going to be the right one for them. But one of the things we can do, especially with some of this genetic testing we're talking about and some of this evaluation that we're looking at from a functional medicine approach is we can really focus on, okay, for this individual person, what are the ones they really need to focus on? What's the food they really need to focus on? What are maybe some supplements that they need to focus on to help them get to their optimal health? And that's, I think, when we see them work even better.
Yeah, right? And there's amazing stuff that also is being looked at in terms of detoxification and cancer treatments like high-dose vitamin C IV, which we do at the Ultra Wellness Center.
Yep.
Can be extremely effective as an adjunct treatment to traditional cancer therapy to reduce the risk of the cancer not responding to the chemo or afterwards to prevent it from coming back. So there's so much that can be done. And I think, one last point I want to make is that, we think of the tests we do in medicine as prevention. So a mammogram is prevention. Colonoscopy is prevention. A prostate exam is prevention. They're not prevention. They're early detection. So you have to actually already have the problem before you find it positive,
right?
Which is good. It's a screening test, and you find it early enough, you won't die. That's great, but it's not true prevention. And what we're talking about in functional medicine is true prevention.
Yeah.
Whether you've already had it and you want to prevent it from coming again, or you have a family history you're worried about, you actually can map out what's wrong and fix those things, and it makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just to recap here. We are so inundated with cancer. There isn't anybody that hasn't been touched with it. My family, I had my sister and my dad both have cancer. And they were sort of late stage when they discovered them, which is hard to do anything about. But I don't want people to feel disempowered because with functional medicine and using that lens and the kinds of work we do at the Ultra Wellness Center, we can map out what the imbalances are, what the risks are. We can design a personalized treatment program for you that actually tests the things that matter, whether it's your nutritional stuff, we're looking at beta glucuronidase in your poop, or looking at heavy metal levels or pesticide levels, or looking at insulin, or looking at the methylated nutrients that you need, or your glutathione levels. We check all of that. And that helps us to create a personalized roadmap for you, along with other things we recommend, dietary recommendations, because we know so much about diet and cancer.
Yes.
And that is such a big, at Cornell where you went, and I remember I took a nutrition course and I had a book, it was like from the National Cancer Institute called Diet and Cancer. And this was back in the 70s. And we know a lot about this. I remember speaking to my oncology, attending when I was doing my oncology rotation in medical school. And I said, what percentage of cancers do you think are diet related? And I thought he was going to like 10%, 20%. He's like 70%.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, because that's good, because it means we can do something about
We
it.
can do stuff about it.
So
Absolutely.
if you have cancer, or you know someone with cancer and you want a different approach, I would encourage you to check out somebody who's trained in functional medicine. If you love that last video, you're going to love the next one. Check it out here.
Historically, 100 years ago, we slept 9 hours a night. Now we're sleeping an average of 7 or less on the population basis. And that's not good. And it's driven, I think, because of this sort of over compulsiveness of our society, the sort of ever